verse that we're studying, where Paul prays, that we would grow up in all things into Christ. So it's still that verse, that we would grow up in all things into Christ. And we've talked about how it is God's will that we would have a whole conversation with him, a whole closeness to him before we'd appear to each other in the mornings, that we would have real communion with him. And I think, Martha, you implied, as I could guess, is true of many of us, that it is so easy for the quiet time to just deteriorate, just be a quickie. Of course, that's not the Father's plan for us, but that we would have a whole life with him, conversation with him, before we ever left the bedroom, as it were. But that would be the tenor of our lives anyway, whether it ties to our morning quiet time or just our whole attitude to life, that we would come to life and to each other with a whole life inside ourselves that we had with God, a whole life of joy and delight and love. And then that we'd meet each other and we would be filled with that, and the cup would overflow to each other, and we wouldn't be so much hit by what Martha's face looks like or what Greg's face looks like, or what the weather is like, but we would be filled with this life inside, and we would just spill it over to others. Of course, I know it from the human animal spirit of a little Belfast boy. I used to come down in the morning, and of course Irene knows I would pull my mother's apron strings because that annoyed her. I said, "Hi, Mom," or Mother, whatever I called her. And it was as if your whole being was filled with life. You were so full of life that it didn't matter if anybody else had life or not, you were full of it. Well, that's God's will. Not what that silly little fellow did, but it's God's will that his life, our whole life of him, our whole delight in him, would fill our lives, so that we were going down not to see, I hope somebody says something nice to me today, or I hope somebody treats me right, or I hope it's a good day, or the sun shines, or I hope the job goes better than it did yesterday, but that we'd be so full of life, that we'd just meet each other filled with it, with what the Bible often says, cup overflowing, and that would pour out to each other. And of course that would swamp anybody who came with a sour face, and it wouldn't be an effort on your part, to say to yourself, I should not resent them, I should not give them a sharp answer for the comment that they made to me, but your own heart would be filled with generosity and magnanimity and a whole delight in life, and it would just flow out to them, and it would fill them and touch them. And then that you'd tackle the day that way, you'd know what God wanted you to do, not by some spooky voice coming into you. You just, in your conversation with him, in your whole relationship with him, you'd know what you were to do and what you had to do as far as the world was concerned, and what he wanted you to do in that opportunity that you were given. And so our life would go like that. That's what we've talked about as God's plan. That's the spiritual life, where you would get from your inner life with our Father a whole direction and a whole feeling about life that will spill out to everybody else. And of course it's turned absolutely the opposite way. We know it, and I've done the diagram a little more neatly this morning, so at least you can read it clearly. And of course it's gone the other way, It's not come from there, through communion and to other people. It's come this way, and all of us, most people are in that state, the unregenerate state. And they live this way. They look at things for their sense of security. That's all they think of. They get up in the morning and, how do I make sure I have enough money today to get through, or enough money to retire on, or enough clothes to keep myself warm, and the whole thing of significance. Are they treating me right? Are these people regarding me as I really ought to be regarded in my important position and state? Are people giving me the significance that I ought to have? They're giving it to Posh, and they're giving it to Beckham, and they're giving it to Elvis, but are they giving it to me? And I'm going to demand that they do, and this person that I've met doesn't seem to be treating me right. And that other person, they're ignoring me, and they're paying attention to all the other people. Why is that? And so most people, live on that level. And most people, they are not getting anything. They're not. They're unregenerate. They have no contact with God at all. They depend on whether it's, thank goodness it's Friday, thank God it's Friday. Are the circumstances such that they make me happy? What kind of a day is it going to be today? Oh, it looks a bit gloomy. It's one of those sad old days. Or is it going to be a good day because it's Friday and I get off today and I have the weekend to look forward to, and lifts my spirits, And that's the way the whole world lives. It tries to get from things and people and circumstances, security, significance, and happiness, and it's just a whirl. They just whirl around each other. They just feed each other. They feed each other dissatisfaction on the whole, because these people never give you enough to give you the sense of significance that you'd get from your Father. These things never give you enough security, the kind of security you'd get from him who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. It's the same with the circumstances. The circumstances, especially as life goes on, the circumstances are never enough to give you the happiness that you can only get from the one who lives forever. So most of the world is very unhappy and dissatisfied. And that's the way we ourselves start off. And then, of course, we've talked about it, how you become aware that God actually does care about you. He does actually love you. And you begin to sense that he is merciful towards you, and that he does forgive you. And his attitude to you is one of acceptance. And, of course, you come into the new birth, and you begin to get a little bit of life through communion, very little, We have our little prayer times, our little quiet times, and we get something from God, and it helps us. And we get some ideas at times of what he wants us to do. Often it's a bit like the Old Testament people, it comes in a dream, or it comes in a sudden vision, or often, I'm afraid, it comes still from these people, somebody whom we respect says something, and we say, it witnesses with my spirit, and so we get a little bit of guidance from the prophet that the Old Testament prophet comes along, the priest that says something, or our dads or mums, and so a lot of our guidance still comes there, but a little intuition, The conscience, of course, is filled with laws, filled with the old ideas that the unregenerate man has, because he's brought up in a certain society that will not allow you to eat people because you're not cannibals, but it will allow you to do other things. On the other hand, it won't allow you to murder. So you have certain laws that govern your conscience in there. And most of us live that kind of half-life, it is. It's a little alive to God, but generally, it's working much on the old basis that it was before, depending on things and people and circumstances for these things. Generally concentrating on enjoying the things, and generally on using the people, and generally on being ruled by the circumstances. And even though you're born of God, you're still actually carnal. You're still living from the outside in, not really from the inside out. And of course there's that great battle there that comes to us. Are we really willing to live dependent on God's love alone, and are we willing to die to these things? And that's what we have called to the baptism of the Spirit, or having a clean heart, or being filled with the Spirit, or coming into the second blessing, or coming into sanctification. We've talked about that as that dying to self that allows the Holy Spirit to begin to fill us and to begin to get our life going really from the inside to the out. And so we start to experience that. We start to experience a freedom from our slavery to these things. At last we realize that in Christ we were crucified to these things, and the world was crucified to us. And we begin to experience a little of this rejoicing, beginning to rejoice in Him and enjoy Him more than the things. And we look not to these things now to enjoy. And so, of course, that frees you from a great slavery to things that takes place in the carnal life. And it's the same with the people. You die to what people think of you. You die to whether they praise you or don't praise you. And you are alive to God. And you realize at last that your life is hid with Christ in God. And His love is the only one that is important. And it brings you to a freedom from your circumstances. You die to whether this is a nice, comfortable bed that you have, or whether this is a nice group of people that you're with, or whether things look good for the coming summer. You die to those circumstances and you begin to be freed from the world. And so the step from carnality into the baptism of the Spirit brings a great deliverance for us. What I think we are surprised at is that we find our soulish functions still operate the way they used to. They still are not really submissive to the Spirit of Christ that fills us. They still operate in the way they've been operating for 10, 20, 30 years. And we find that we have a soulish life that actually is the one that relates to the world more than the Spirit-filled life that goes on inside us. We find, for instance, that our mind still has a tendency to try to manipulate things around, manipulate the bank account around so that the money problems will work. And so there's a part of us that reminds us the cattle on 1,000 hills are His, and He will supply you as He supplied the birds, but still we tend to do a little on the side of calculating. Now, our mind still tends to think, yes, how much money have I in the bank, and will that meet what I need in the future? It isn't so much even the calculating of those things as that your heart tends to be tied to it. You tend to be drawn out to that. You like to think this is purely an intellectual exercise. That's part of what the mind ought to do. It ought not only to understand what God is giving through the intuition of my spirit and to understand how to express that in my life, but it ought also to be able to size things up, to know the industry averages and to know what's what, and to be able to do the calculations. That's a legitimate function of the mind. But it is that our heart tends to be laying emphasis on that. Our heart tends to say, yes, yes, and therefore, how are we going to manage these things so that they'll work? How are we going to make them work? So we work still in the old soulish way. Even though we're justifying it by saying, yes, there is a right purpose, and it's true, there is a right function of the mind. The mind is here to be able to calculate that's 3 feet and not 2 feet, to be able to calculate, yes, it's out of gas, I ought to put gas in it. It is meant to do that, but as long as your heart is not tied to that and thinking that that's the only thing you can do, that your success or your ability to do God's will comes from your mind's ability to size things up and make them work. That's where the soulishness comes in. The soulish tendency is still to depend on the mind, not to live in the midst of the Father's plenty, but to have in mind, oh yes, now the Father will supply all my needs, but this is the situation with the money, and this is really what I'm depending on. So you're spiritual in the sense that you have life coming from God that has filled you and did bring a momentary deliverance, but your day-to-day life is lived on the mind's appreciation and understanding of the world, not on your mind's understanding of God's intuition to you. So in a way, your conscience is constraining your will, and that's a move forward from the carnal life. But still, when it comes to directing the mind and emotions, you find that they are still operating in the same old way. Same with the emotions. You are filled with the Holy Spirit, and the conscience is constraining your will to know that the only thing that matters is that God himself loves you. But still you think, well, yes, but it's important to know what people think of me. And it is important to be able to read people. And it is important to attend to people. And it is. It's important to attend to people from the point of view of what they need or how you can help them. But the tendency of the soulish life is to depend on those people, to use them for your own happiness. And so if they don't make you happy, you're rather discontented with them, and if they're critical of you, there are knots in your stomach. There are knots in your stomach. And in a way, you're still experiencing the torture and the pain that the world can inflict upon you, even though you know that your Father loves you and that his love is the only thing that matters, and it doesn't really matter what people think about you. Yet still, your soulish tendency is there for your emotions to depend on what people think and say. And so you find yourself, you think to yourself, am I slipping back into the old self? Am I slipping back into my dependence on what people say about me? And it's not really that you've lost the fullness of the Spirit, but you really have never allowed it to remold and to renew completely your mind and emotions so that they are still attached here rather than attached to your spirit, so that they are governed by still the world of things and people and circumstances rather than by your spirit. And it's the same with the circumstances. You're very clear that there is a delight and joy in the maker of the dawn and the maker of the sunset that is far beyond the sunset itself and far beyond the dawn. That the joy and delight that you have in the one who makes the sky is far more wonderful than the sky itself. And you sense that, but you've still got emotions that were uplifted by the beauty of the sunrise. And to some extent, it's not wrong, except that the degree of delight that you get from those circumstances can draw you back into a similar dependence on a dark, thundering, rainy day, or on circumstances that don't look so wonderful for the summer vacation. So the emotions are still, in a sense, tied to circumstances, and they haven't been completely renewed so that they get their main life from the Father himself. And of course, what we're facing there is what old me regards as strong trends, tendencies, ways of operating, strengths, he would call them, that have to be broken. And God often has to use circumstances to break those. Often it's finally when the dear dad dies. Often it's finally when your best friend no longer really seems to be your best friend. Often it's when these things grind you so tight that there's no way that you can make it work financially. but often God has to allow us to come into breaking experiences that destroy us. And so that's, I don't know where you are, but it may be that some of us are operating there and have not got yet to a spiritual life where the enjoyment of things is replaced by this true rejoicing in our relationship with God, where our tendency to use people has not been utterly wiped out, and we truly love people and are free from depending upon people, where instead of being ruled by our circumstances, we begin to rule the circumstances as spiritual overcomers who have overcome the world. The clear revelation that I got in the twilight hours last night was that many of us are carotid. I think it is a word, but many of us are carotid. And I asked Irini, I had forgotten what the term was with the old heart business, but many of our arteries are blocked by cholesterol plaque. That is, we're living so much that way that everything inside us is becoming carotid. That happens, I think, because if you're all worked up about what these people do to you, then you're strained, you're under strain. Doesn't matter whether it's just you're concerned about, are you doing your job right? That's part of it. Am I doing my job right? Am I up to this? And do these people think I'm doing my job right? Or this situation here, how am I going to make it through this week? How am I going to pay the bills at the end of the month? How am I going to sort out the bills at the business? And that creates strain in our bodies. Our arteries are under strain. Our veins are under strain. Our muscles are under strain. And our life is getting stiffer and stiffer as the years go by. And that happens when we live this old soulish life. Of course, especially when we live a carnal life. But even when we live the soulish life, instead of getting younger and younger as the years go by, which I'm convinced is the Father's will, because he makes all things new, we get older and older. And of course, we will die earlier than we need die. So I got that, fairly clearly, that these things are not just spiritual truths. These affect your health and your life and your whole physical being. And we are either being renewed day by day by the life of Jesus pouring through us and in us, or we're getting old and strained and becoming more carotid day by day. So it is a reality. It's just the old diagram, but it is a reality. Whether we're living from the inside out, or whether we're still partially living from the outside in. And I'm preaching to myself as to you. It matters not where we each are or what we each think. The fact is, this applies to all of us. We're either living in the full, free, fresh life of Jesus and of his Father, or we're living this old half-life, either carnal or soulish. And the Father has set the whole thing up so that that's the life. I mean, this is reality. That's probably the truth that we should bring home to each other this morning. This is unreality. These aren't just ways to do. These are destroyed. This has already been destroyed by the Father in Jesus. This is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's why God makes it possible at all, because he wants us to choose this. So he's made it possible. He has made this, you're right. He has made this kind of ridiculous half-life possible so that we would have a choice between that tree and this tree. And really, we're here to make that choice. So I'd encourage you to look at it straight head on.